done yesterday.
Oh, okay. I was going to pick what test was it
But
about.
set in gradually.
Oh, okay, okay. You're able to read?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So why don't you
Avatar
start
Meher
with
Baba.
Baba
Yes, yes.
Ki Jai? Yeah, yeah, please.
Uh, Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai. The seven realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following. Number one, the only real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. The only real love is the love for this infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so called bad, in saint and in so called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand, without expectation of reward. When compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which the poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. So thank you for reading that. With that, we go to Pran and Energy, which is on page 304. And as we were discussing in the last weekend, probably we will be able to finish this book over this weekend's two readings. Before we start, any thoughts from last week's reading? Any questions?
No.
Okay. Anyway, it's just been the three of us now. So I will continue. Pran and Pran energy and Akash matter. Pran is energy, the motion and power created by the process of infinite thinking. Akash is matter, the material and substance which is created by energy, the force of thought. When infinite thinking comes out of infinite mind in capital, movements begin to surge, and the formless imagination, the formless creation, manifests in mental, subtle, and gross forms. The most fine, formless universe is made up of energy and matter linked together. The fine mental world is energy and matter together in seed form, and the subtle and gross worlds are the acting of energy, motion, on matter, material. That is, matter moves. As energy acts on matter, each self creates subtle and gross worlds. In this condition, energy and matter are self creating the subtle and gross forms constantly. The gross body, then, is the same subtle body in gross occupation of physical action, which is subtle energy in action. That is, a material form moves. I'll repeat this paragraph. The gross body then is the same subtle body in gross occupation of physical action, which is subtle energy in action. That is, a material form moves. In the ordinary awake state, energy and matter manifest in gross form. In the ordinary dream state, energy and matter manifest in subsubtle form, meaning the breath is drawn within, inhaled, and becomes internal in a semi gross form. In the dream state, the dreamer has an impression of energy in a gross sanskaric form. The gross sanskaras of the person are in a partially non functioning state. Gross action stops, but certain predominant gross thoughts remain. I'll repeat the dream state. In the dream state, the dreamer has an impression of energy in a gross sanskaric form. The gross sanskaras of the person are in a partially non functioning state. Gross action stops, but certain predominant gross thoughts remain. This is the dream state. The impressions one has while dreaming are also a result of sanskaras accumulated from past lives, which give rise to situations in dreams that are associated with the present. The past molds the future. For this reason, dreams can probe into the future, but do not fully reveal the future. In the deep sleep state, energy and matter, by becoming internalized, inhaled, completely disappear into the original, unmanifested, formless beyond. In deep sleep, sanskaras are non functioning, and so human consciousness is dormant, and energy and matter are temporarily outside time. They are stilled. The combination of energy and matter is the formless imagination or thinking state. When one thinks, imagination, the formless creation, manifests in mental, subtle, and gross forms. This means that the original matter, Akasha, which is the original imagination, becomes mental. The mental becomes subtle, and the subtle becomes gross. The thought of the mental becomes the energy of the subtle, and the subtle energy becomes gross thinking. Key line here, the thought of the mental becomes the energy of the subtle, and the subtle energy becomes the gross thinking. Infinite thoughts fill the mental world, infinite energies fill the subtle world, infinite material forms fill the gross world. And all this is the result of thinking. It is the motion and power created by thinking that is prana. Energy being the power of the thought or the motion of the thinking. It is thinking that creates creation. The subtle and mental worlds are the manifestation of universal energy and universal matter through the infinite thinking of infinite mind, capital, which is Ishvara. Pause here. If there's any thoughts, questions.
The
So in
basic
thought,
thing is the
yeah,
thinking process. So from the beginning, who am I is the first thinking process. And from there, the whole process of thinking creates the initially the mental world and then the subtle world and then the gross world as also the forms. So that is thinking is the uh, basis for everything. Jai Baba.
yeah. And it starts in the mental world and it goes to the subtle and then
Yes.
expresses itself as the gross as well. Consciousness, I'll continue reading. Consciousness is the highest in the human form, and for that reason, the human Jivatma is the highest form. The sanskaras necessary to attain the highest consciousness are created by passing from stone form to human form. From the most finite consciousness, the stone has to evolve naturally into human form and have full consciousness, intelligence. So, um, I don't know if you noticed the comment I put about evolution and consciousness as I was listening to God Speaks. I think it was yesterday or day before, where in Ward Park's discussion there was a reference to how obviously consciousness is fully developed in the human form and there's nothing else to be done, and there is no more evolution of form as well because the objective was only evolution of consciousness. I had this cheeky question, which I think I shared there, which is, does minor evolution continue or is it static now?
Uh, as for the lot of alien
Science.
stories
Hmm.
and so many pictures that we have seen, evolution of form
Hmm.
uh, goes on slightly stunting as for science fiction, but the
Hmm.
mind keeps increasing or
Yes.
the
In fact,
intelligence keeps increasing.
mhm.
So it is in that way we can say that the consciousness has become totally mature and form is becoming gradually say losing its necessities so that it may uh, change over but remains the consciousness as it is or increasing or maturing, whatever you want to call it. Looks
Yeah,
some interpretation like that.
true, true, true. So I think, and the larger thing is in this whole timeline, this is so minor and difficult to confirm. I mean, as you said, science and not just science fiction also seems to suggest that there is some little genetic and mutation that is happening to largely around size of the brain, size of the body itself, and so on and so forth for the different human species. But yeah, I think maybe it's just so minor. But we are not. I mean, none of us are fighting the fact that there's nothing more to be done from a consciousness standpoint. It has reached its zenith, but it's only, as I said, a cheeky question on whether there's something happening on the form at all, right?
Yes, maybe answered by the next avatar.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. So, but see, the key thing is going to be, even if so, if you go back to what we learned in God Speaks, which is about even the whole idea of evolution of form is all with the goal of
Good.
getting to human form, and the human form is what is actually at core, which is expressed even in a stone. So it's just sleeping, right? Then when you get to minerals, and then you start to get to vegetable, even the vegetable is a representation of the human form in its own way. It's only standing upside down. So that's a very interesting series of things Baba says about how it is the human form that is actually unconsciously and under the hood, the basis for all of the evolution of form. So in that sense, that's not going to change. So even if we, in the next avatar, after a few million years, what we see may be stunted people or larger brains, but then the core structure of the human form will not change, right? So yeah, I
Yes,
don't know.
that's why the expansion of the meaning of human form is the ultimate, and that is achieved. Means
Hmm.
that the form required to say sort of use the intelligence or the mind or consciousness has fully developed, and there
Hmm.
can be gradual over a period of time modifications in the form, but nothing much to be done in the sort of intelligence or consciousness of that form. Only thing is expression of that consciousness which is happening now may become faster and better with the changes of little changes that can happen in the form of the human body. So that's how I see that, because as of now, all the human beings are capable of becoming transcending from this form nature into the God state. So that is the ultimate goal, which is already achieved with this form. So any further is this achievement in a slightly modified form. That's all. That may not add anything in substantial nature to the goal of achieving Godhood. Jai Baba.
Yeah, Baba. I think the larger thing is, I do not even think that the stakes are changing, right? Just because one becomes in this minor mutation or evolution of the human form, even if we get brainier, I don't
Mm.
think it changes the odds, right? You
Yes,
still
yes.
do the 8.4 million births. You still experience the reincarnation. Probably
Mm,
your faculties are a little more tuned or a little more
mm.
sharper, but
Yeah.
the nature of the human mind and the sanskaric load ensures that you go through the 8.4, right? So you can't,
Yeah.
it's inescapable, right? That's the way I see it.
Yes.
Hi, Sunil. Jai Baba.
Long time no see.
No, here also. He's on mute.
Jai Baba, I'm
Jai
on a
Baba.
uphill trek. I'm panting. I'm listening.
Okay. Okay, please continue. Enjoy.
Yes,
Enjoy
thank you.
nature as you listen to this. Take care. Jai Baba.
Thank you, Jai Baba.
The the sanskaras, I'll continue. The sanskaras necessary to attain the highest consciousness are created by passing from stone form to human form. From the most finite consciousness, the stone has to evolve naturally into human form and have full consciousness, that is, intelligence. In evolutionary forms, the soul, the infinite intelligence in capital, cannot be experienced. since thinking in those pre-human forms is not infinite. The soul, capital S, being infinite, requires infinite thinking to realize itself. Only in the human form do the thinking powers reach their highest point, but in this human form, the mind thinks of imagination. In brackets, the consciousness is involved in creation. The meaning of thinking of imagination is that mind experiences the gross, subtle, and mental worlds, and this experience of creation creates sanskaras. If these sanskaras are annihilated, then the mind of man, infinite mind, experiences itself infinitely and unlimitedly. The sanskaras force the infinite mind, in capital, to imagine, that is, the sanskaras compel infinite mind, in capital, to feed the false mind, the false act of thinking and illusion. Sanskaras are the cause, the food of this false self, false I-ness, false ego, called man and his creation. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. So it's prana and matter, akasha. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll continue with the next chapter, which is knowledge of the soul. In its eternal state, in eternity, the capital S soul is immortal, indivisible, and one everywhere. The capital S soul is perfect knowledge, and its being is knowledge itself. But it has no experience of its knowledge. It is knowledge, but in the state of not knowing, that is, in the beyond beyond, and as the Jivatma. This not knowing is false knowledge, and this false knowledge is the state of man. To know itself, the soul took form, body, and not knowing became the eyes. When the soul had form according to its shape and size, meaning according to its imagination, the illusion looked separate to the eyes and appeared to exist separately. The meaning of the pupil of the eye is this not knowing, and deep within the pupil is unconscious knowledge. The unconscious knowledge pressed the not knowing through the eyes, that is to know, and according to the pressure, that is to know, illusion had to manifest and imagination had to be seen. Above and below is knowledge unconscious, and the not knowing is in between. The point that's being made here is you have unconscious knowledge at the beyond beyond state, and you come to a false knowledge, which is actually a state of not knowing, and then you go back to knowledge unconscious. I continue. A clash between the upper and
Go to
lower,
knowledge, unconscious or conscious at the end?
conscious.
Conscious, yes.
But here it
So,
says, no, but here it says above and below is knowledge unconscious.
yes, that
And
is okay. But in the process of spiritual evolution, consciousness remains at the seventh plane. You are conscious of the full knowledge. But how do we take this? Above and below is knowledge unconscious. Yes, the above is beyond, and
yeah,
below is in the illusion. Knowledge is unconscious.
no, in the middle
And
is illusion. The way I understand the,
anyway, we will read and
yeah,
find
we'll
out
read
what.
further and see if there's, yeah.
We can read from
So,
the unconscious on top.
sure. The unconscious knowledge pressed the not knowing through the eyes to know, and according to the pressure to know, illusion had to manifest, imagination had to be seen. Above and below is knowledge, unconscious, and the not knowing is in between. A clash between the upper and lower knowledge created lightning, a flash which is light with fire. And because not knowing was pressed by knowledge from above and below, the not knowing is shining from within according to its round form, the eyes. This shining that comes from within proves that the sun does not exist. Light is contained within the eye. It is knowledge, it is light everywhere, and not knowing is the medium to experience this immortal knowledge and everlasting light. So, I'm a bit confused here, but I'm broadly thinking not knowing is coming from within, which is just in the state of illusion itself. Even not knowing belongs there, which
Yes,
is the false knowledge aspect.
yes,
Yeah. Knowledge is all existing, and knowledge knowing its all existence came about because of not knowing, as it is knowledge itself that is not knowing itself. I'll read the line again. Knowledge is all
yes,
existing, and knowledge knowing its all existence came about. Knowledge knowing its all existence came about because of not knowing, as it is knowledge itself that is not knowing itself.
itself.
Because knowledge is everywhere, the not knowing is everywhere, as it itself is knowledge unconscious. This not knowing became the medium through which unconscious knowledge experienced knowledge, that is, conscious self knowledge. This not knowing, I repeat, became the medium through which the unconscious knowledge experienced knowledge, conscious self knowledge. Here and now, knowledge has become not knowing in the present state of everyone. And this not knowing has become knowledge. The result of this for everyone is his present state of not knowing. The state is not experiencing knowledge. Knowledge is the one real I, self. The medium of not knowing is there for the sake of knowledge, for knowledge to know its own pure state as formless, infinite, eternal, and indivisible. But while experiencing itself, that is, not as knowledge, the one real I is in two contrary states, and these states are opposites, one of knowledge knowing, and another of knowledge not knowing. Therefore, at every stage of development, of gaining consciousness, of gaining knowledge, not knowing is in opposition to knowledge. Not knowing is quite contrary to knowing. Not knowing is finite, seen against not knowing. Knowledge is infinite because knowledge is the end of not knowing. Knowledge has no form, whereas not knowing has form. Knowledge experiences the real I as formless, and not knowing experiences the false I with a body. Compared to knowledge experiencing itself as formless and infinite, and knowledge experiencing itself through not knowing, the not knowing is most finite, though this not knowing is everywhere, as it is the medium to real knowledge of the self. The knowledge that is infinite and knows it through the channel of not knowing, because it must know it through that medium, while experiencing itself through not knowing, is totally finite, because this not knowing is totally opposite to the infinite. As long as the time is not ripe for knowledge to know itself through the medium of not knowing is endless and infinite, and knowing is limited and finite. Knowing and not knowing exist as opposites, quite contrary, though both are one and the same originally. Originally, knowledge, knowing, and not knowing, ignorance, are both one in the beyond beyond. But through this not knowing, knowledge can experience its real self. Knowledge passes through not knowing to know itself, and though both were originally one, it is their mutual experience that they are contrary. When knowing is finite, limited by not knowing is endless and infinite in limitation. When knowing is infinite, endless in knowledge, not knowing is limited, reduced to nothing. For example, imagine that a piece of candy represents knowledge. The meaning, nature of candy is sweetness, but sweetness cannot taste itself, which implies that the candy can have no knowledge of its pure state. This not tasting itself by the candy is the state of not knowing. In that state of not knowing is non sweetness. Thereby, not knowing becomes the medium, and through this medium, sweetness experiences itself. But when not knowing begins to taste this candy, the whole piece of candy does not dissolve at first, but a most limited portion dissolves. That is, only the outer edges. Non sweetness is not tasting. It is the same as not knowing that one does not know. That is, until one tastes the full sweetness. Sweetness and non-sweetness are states of experience, and until the candy is fully tasted, sweetness is limited and non-sweetness is unlimited. In the process of dissolving, knowing, the result of sweetness and non-sweetness is the same in the untasted candy, and the actual experience of tasting the sweetness when compared with the full sweet state of sweetness is most finite, even though sweetness itself is infinite as a quality, in quality. So it is with knowledge and not knowing. Knowledge continues not to know until not knowing is dissolved to nothing. Knowledge is not known until it is experienced as not known. To know, one has to experience that one does not know. And knowing is dissolving not knowing to nothing. From knowledge came not knowing, which implies that originally knowledge knew that it did not know. Knowledge had the experience of knowledge of ignorance. It knew it was unknown. This implies that knowledge came to know and it knew through not knowing. And what did knowledge know? It knew the not knowing, that is, knowledge experienced not knowing, that is, ignorance of itself. The experience of not knowing went on and on until knowledge knew, until it knew the knowledge of itself. It was through not knowing that knowing was experienced. By knowing, knowledge was gained. And from knowledge came the experience of ignorance as ignorance. By the experience of ignorance was gained the experience of knowledge as knowledge. And with that came the knowledge of knowledge, the use of knowledge. Infinite intelligence in capital. For example,
here, here that neti philosophy comes
example, yeah.
By the experience of ignorance was gained the experience of knowledge as knowledge. So by saying this is not that, this is not that, this is not that, you are experiencing ignorance after ignorance and shedding them. Then you get to knowledge. That is almost equal to what we say as neti way of going through the spiritual path of knowledge.
Yeah, it's very interesting thought you bring up. So yes, progressive dismissal of elimination as a means of discovering the truth, right?
Yeah.
So progressive elimination of understanding, which is not knowing in this sense. Different kinds of not knowing takes you to the real knowledge at the end. Yeah. Cool. Okay, I'll continue. For example, it is said that knowledge is light. Light cannot experience itself as light. Because of that, darkness was created. Darkness could have been experienced through light, but there was no light originally without the experience of darkness. Knowledge had to be unknown before knowing itself. Darkness then became the object of seeing, but now darkness had the glitter of light itself. And so the light sees it. Nothing can be seen without a shining of light on it in the form of the sun, the moon, or a lamp. It is only through darkness that light can be experienced, and only through light can darkness be experienced. For knowledge to experience itself, not knowing is the medium. It is by not knowing that knowing experienced itself. And during this experience of not knowing, knowing became the object of knowledge. Thus, knowledge, experience of knowing itself, was had by not knowing. Not knowing became the experiencer of knowing, and knowledge became the object of experience and the goal of the experiencer. In the beginning, the knowing of knowledge disappeared, and at that moment, knowledge became the object of knowing, knowing the not knowing, but at the same time, at the same moment, the not knowing state became knowledge. This state of not knowing having become knowledge happened after the effacement of its not knowing condition. It thought it knew when it did not. I repeat that line. This state of not knowing having become knowledge happened after the effacement of its not knowing condition. This
Yes,
effacement,
that is quite a nice quote, I think, here. So the effacement of its not knowing condition. So that is, we are thinking in duality. We think everything around us, what we see, what we hear, what we do, all that as the truth. That is the state. This state of not knowing having become knowledge, that we think what we see, the science, everything is the knowledge, happened after the effacement of its not knowing condition. So we have come to a stage where we have lost the faculty of not knowing. We think falsely knowing everything as known to us. That is the way we can look at it, I think. Jai Baba.
yeah, correct. This effacement, I continue, is a deception, a mere imagination, because without it, knowing when one does not know, to know is infinite. I repeat this line, it's a bit confusing. This effacement is a deception, a mere imagination, because without it, that is, without this effacement, knowing when one does not know, then to know is infinite.
We keep on searching.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that is infinite.
Yeah. In the beginning of knowledge, it was not knowing that turned into the unlimited, and knowledge turned into the object of knowing. Although knowledge is infinite, because of its turning into the object of knowing, it remains with the capacity of experiencing, that is, to experience knowing. The capacity of knowledge to experience is infinite, but while it is experiencing, according to its experience, knowledge takes a form which limits its capacity. Though knowledge is always infinite, because of its not knowing that it is infinite, it becomes limited in form, in its capacity. And this not knowing exists to experience knowing. Continue. In this way, not knowing becomes the object of knowing, whereas knowing in its limited capacity becomes the knower. Jananahara. It is proved by the similarity of these two states, first of not knowing being the object of knowing, and second of knowing being a limited knower, that becomes the infinite knower. That knowledge, the knower, and the thing to be known are all one and the same and constitute knowing. It is the one, the infinite knower, who on different occasions plays different roles according to the occasion, condition, and who has different names depending upon his duty. Here and now, not knowing becomes the knower, and knowing the object to know. When experiencing knowledge, not knowing, Jananahara, itself becomes the object of knowing and forgets its state of Jananahara. When not knowing resumes its state of Jananahara, it becomes separate from the object of knowing. Then knowledge, the knower, and the thing to be known are one, and this is the knowing of Jananahara. Knowledge is eternal, and when there is Jananahara, the knower, there is nothing to know. But when there is something to know, Jananahara is not there. For the knowledge to know itself, not knowing is the channel. In not knowing, every individual particle of not knowing has to experience not knowing. This not knowing has come into being in the form of the universe, and everything relating to it has to be experienced. The meaning of the act of not knowing is the universe, and through the experience of not knowing, knowing is known. By the act of not knowing, the universe does not exist. The meaning of not knowing the not knowing is the experience of knowing. When one is knowing, how could that which has no existence, the universe, exist? This proves that the creation is an infinite spread out, pasara, of not knowing. And therefore, the universe is absolute imagination, as it is nothing but the state of not knowing. The meaning of not knowing is Maya, the process of infinite false thinking, which thinks it knows when it does not. And the creation is the form of Maya, the outcome of false thinking, the result of not knowing. And these are exactly the phraseology that Baba prefers as well. So the meaning of not knowing is Maya. Maya, as in brackets, that process of infinite false thinking, which thinks it knows when it does not. And the creation is the form of Maya. In brackets, the outcome of false thinking, the result of not knowing. Knowledge is infinite and the end to not knowing. Not knowing is opposite to knowledge, and creation is its outcome. Since creation has a beginning, it has an end. And that end comes when there is knowing. Not knowing has infinite universes, and all of them have come out of one point, the Om point or the Ahura point. Continue. Since this point is round, the whole world is in a mess. Circles going round and round. The circle is actually very small, most finite. But for the Jivatma entrapped in the attachments of Maya, because it does not know, this illusory circle expands. And so the Jivatma keeps going round and round, producing more mess because it does not know. When the Jivatma eventually realizes the self, it knows that it is where it was in the beginning, but in the beginning, it did not know that it was on the point. Realization means reaching that point, and on reaching it, knowing it. The Jivatma is then at the same point where once before it did not know. At realization, it reaches that point and knows. Thus, to know knowledge, not knowing is proved a necessary medium, and through it can knowledge be experienced. But because of Maya, illusion, when not knowing in human form becomes the knower, it has to pass through the rounds of births and deaths. And thus, the pilgrimage of the Jivatma stretches far too long, and Jiva must think infinitely before it can know the knowledge that knowledge knows. This knowledge is that knowledge knows and ignorance does not.
Oh,
This knowledge is that knowledge knows and ignorance does not. So that draws a close to what I must say I am convinced is not knowing, because a lot of it I did not know. Right? I'm still to get. Anyway, I think I get the broad theme that's being brought out here, and the theme of also the not knowing being represented as Maya. But obviously, the phraseology is pretty confusing here, with the repeated references to not knowing and knowing. But I think, like you said, the last line is nice. This knowledge is that knowledge knows and ignorance does not.
no.
Any other questions, thoughts, insights of those who know and those who don't?
No, reading this, that Neti philosophy is, say, the strength of analysis to know at the end that it is nothing becomes quite clear. So, if you think like that, if you try to discard everything one by one, what does it remain? It remains nothing at the end also. That is knowledge. So all that what we see is not the actuality. Then what is the actuality? Actuality is also nothing.
Nothing.
So that knowledge, if it dawns on you, that is the knowledge knows and ignorance does not.
Correct.
Yes. It's
Okay.
very heady stuff as such. Okay.
Totally agree. I needed to drink water to catch up.
Ashok has joined, I think.
Yes. Okay. So let's continue. We move to the next chapter, the body of God. Everything exists in the body of God. The body of God is the formless body of light, the infinite intelligence in capital. And this formless body is also the darkness, the nothing, the formless creation. Darkness is God's ignorance. The nothing is the darkness, and the formless creation is the imagination. The ignorance, the darkness, and the imagination make up the infinite false mind. The false mind comes from unnatural darkness into unnatural light, which appears as the mental, subtle, and gross universes. These mental, subtle, and gross universes are the apparent forms of unnatural darkness, that is, of the formless, most finite mental imagination, meaning nothing, and the false mind experiences these unnatural states. Natural, formless darkness is the body of natural, formless light. The natural, formless light experiences the apparent natural darkness, the nothing, in the form of the apparent unnatural darkness, which is of unnatural light, that is the world of forms. The apparent unnatural light is the mental, subtle, and gross form, universes, and bodies of natural darkness, and the false mind experiences these forms. When unnatural darkness, the false self, is eliminated, then unnatural light, the creation, that is apparent natural darkness, also is wiped out at the same time. Nothing depends on everything. The nothing is darkness, ignorance, imagination. So, darkness depends on light. Ignorance depends on knowledge. And imagination depends on the infinite intelligence, which is in capital. Sanskaras make up the most finite mental formlessness imprints, which depend on the nothing. Desires are subtle, depending on most finite mental thoughts. Acts or deeds are gross, which depend on the subtle. This is again important. So, desires are subtle, depending on the most finite mental thoughts. So, thoughts are in the mental realm, desires are when they get the energy with it, and acts or deeds are the actual gross, which again start from the desire, which is in the subtle form. In sound sleep or in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, infinite mind is formless infinite imagination. In the sound sleep state, the body of God is an infinite formless imagination, the most infinite fine imagination, the formless nothing, which in the awake and dream states adopts infinite mental, subtle, and gross forms. In the ordinary state of man's dream, infinite mind in capital is the most finite, subtle imagination, and the body of God, which is the creation or nothing, is the most infinite, subtle imagination. In the awake state of the human mind, infinite mind, capital, is the most finite, gross imagination, and the body of God is the most infinite, gross imagination, a universe of endless forms, all that we see. In deep sleep, the body of the human mind is the most finite, mental, formless body, non functioning. Mind functions through the subtle body while in the state of dream, and mind functions through the gross body while in the awake state. So, by the breeze of desire blowing over the ocean of infinite intelligence, capital, the ocean itself became limited by the bubbles. So, by the breeze of desire, repeat, blowing over the ocean of infinite intelligence, the ocean itself became limited by the bubbles. The infinite waves created by the infinite thinking caused infinite foam to rise and limit the limitless ocean, thus forming the body of God.
So
So
this
that's
explanation, the infinite waves created by infinite thinking, and also the so by the breeze of desire. this is the Vim point actually, breeze of desire. Who am I? So from there, blowing over the ocean of infinite intelligence, the ocean itself becomes limited by bubbles.
correct.
Each one is in a different way, say trying to explain the same concept repeatedly. So this book
Yes.
is full of that way of writing.
So it also is a confirmation of all of the interpretations being at core the same, right? So
Yes, yes.
he repeats it based on multiple dimensions. So all those
Ah,
dimensions, yes, are repetitive, but uh, are referring to the same path, the same progression, the same knowledge or
yes,
same concept.
and concept. And one idea, as we were reading through this, at the end, what went through my mind was that Buddha's concept of Shunya philosophy, I was understanding it in a partially wrong way, I think. Shunya is nothing. But as we read through this, as we say neti neti to everything, what remains is totally nothing at the end. That is Shunya. So that is the same explanation. Maybe some interpretations made Buddha that he didn't see the light at the end was the way they used to talk on Buddha's concept earlier. But I think you can see in this light that as you remove every layer of ignorance, what ultimately remains is nothing, that is the knowledge. So that's a
Correct.
nice understanding for me reading through this. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Any other questions before we go to the next one, which is Prakriti, the next chapter?
No. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Jai Baba. Prakriti, nature. Prakriti is nature, the material cause of the universe. And Purusha is unconscious God in man, unconscious infinite intelligence in human form. Nature's creation is the universe. When nature alone is the truth of man, Purusha thinks, I am a body. I do this. I go and I come. I am here now. This means Prakriti is doing false thinking in man, and this state of Purusha is the result of false thinking. Though God in man is always free, unchangeable, and does nothing whatsoever. Because of the falsity of thinking, unconscious God turns into mind, the Jivatma. An unconscious God thinks and identifies himself as mind. Nature does everything, and man thinks he does everything. This thinking on man's part is useless, which is false, and becomes Jiva, which is limited intelligence. God in man never changes, is ever free, but unconscious God as man thinks himself as one with false thinking. When illusion disappears, false thinking also disappears. Then the Jivatma becomes Shiva, who declares the realization of himself. I was always free. I am always free. I am not the body. I am everywhere. It is sanskaras that compel man to create the universe. That is, sanskaras make man the creator, the preserver, and dissolver of universes, and make man experience these universes through the body. This means that sanskaras force unconscious God to play by degrees and one after another the many roles of stone, mineral, vegetable, worm, insect, reptile, fish, bird, and animal, and finally the role of man in many human forms. Okay, that's Prakriti and Purusha. But again, the concept of this Prakriti and Purusha was also explained in an earlier chapter as well.
Yes.
The creation and God in unconscious form being Purusha, Prakriti being creation. Okay, let's plod along a little further. The chapter is Ordinary Man and the Sadguru. When infinite intelligence is in the form of infinite mind, that is, the infinite intelligence thinks in man, it creates mental, subtle, and gross universes from sound sleep to dream and awakening states. Through mental, subtle, and gross bodies, in the form of infinite false mind, it experiences the mental, subtle, and gross worlds in the dream and awake states. When capital infinite intelligence does not think, that is, when capital infinite mind is in sound sleep, mental, subtle, and gross universes and bodies do not exist and there is no thinking about them. Unconscious, experienced thinking. When, as infinite mind, the infinite intelligence thinks through the Sadguru, then though infinite mind creates gross, subtle, and mental universes and bodies, still the infinite intelligence does not experience the gross, subtle, and mental spheres through gross, subtle, and mental bodies, but has its own experience of itself always.
I
In
think
the
you can
ordinary,
read that once again. Mhm.
sure, when as infinite mind, the infinite intelligence thinks through the Sadguru, then though infinite mind creates gross, subtle, and mental universes and bodies, still the infinite intelligence does not experience the gross, subtle, and mental spheres through gross, subtle, and mental bodies, but has its own experience of itself always.
Always. Okay.
That's through the Sadguru.
So that is
In the ordinary man,
this is the double stage of the Sadguru, where he is experiencing the gross world and also he is not there. That's what. So the infinite mind creates gross, subtle, and mental universes and bodies. Still, the infinite intelligence does not experience the gross, subtle, and the mental spheres. So even though the Sadguru is amongst us, he is not experiencing this gross world through the gross, subtle, and mental bodies, but has its own experience of itself always. So he is in the God state always. So this is the way they have represented that. Jai Baba.
so the other thing is he is also simultaneously in both.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So
And one
though,
is he is in the God state, and he is
Mhm.
in the gross world state
Creation
also.
consciousness.
Yes,
Yeah,
but he clearly knows that this creation is nothing.
correct.
Yes,
So when he is in the creation consciousness, he is aware of its finite status, finite whatever status, and he also has experience of the God state all the time.
all the time.
So is it all the time, or does he go in and out? We do not know because there from a
No, that is in and out
use
is
of words.
the no. In and out is for a few like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa when he used to go and come back. But a real
Correct,
Sadguru is always in both these states together,
correct, simultaneously.
simultaneously.
Yeah, I think that's how it's explained as well. In the sense, Paramahamsa keeps coming and going.
Yes,
So it is one phase, one state at a time.
straight
Whereas
at
in
a
the case
time.
of case of Sadguru, it is simultaneous
Simultaneous.
and continuous.
Yes.
Correct. Agreed. In the ordinary man, I continue, and in the Sadguru, the infinite intelligence as the infinite mind creates universes and bodies. But as ordinary man, the infinite intelligence in the state of infinite false mind experiences the creation through mental, subtle, and gross bodies and does not experience itself. I'll repeat this para, but as ordinary man, the infinite intelligence in the state of infinite false mind experiences the creation through mental, subtle, and gross bodies and does not experience itself with a capital I.
Yes.
However, in the state of the Sadguru, the state of infinite real mind, the infinite intelligence experiences itself and not the creation and bodies.
Bodies.
In ordinary man, infinite intelligence thinks of the shadow, it experiences creation and takes the medium of the human body as everything and takes itself, the soul, as nothing. In the divine state of the Sadguru, infinite intelligence experiences the shadow, creation, and the medium, human body, as nothing and experiences its own self as everything. As ordinary man, the infinite intelligence experiences itself as the limited body in gross, subtle, and mental forms. But as the Sadguru, the infinite intelligence experiences itself as bodiless, formless, infinite, and boundless.
Oh,
When
great.
the
Uh,
Yeah, go ahead, Ashok.
I just got one analogy in my mind, which perhaps would which will explain the God creation and the creation and the creation consciousness. So, like a seesaw, when you are fully in God creation, that is everything. And if the slide of the seesaw is towards the ground or zero, then that is nothing, and you are in creation consciousness. And when you reach God consciousness, or when you have realize the world of reality, that's the other side of the seesaw, which is on the top, and you get your God realization. That could be one analogy, that we are always in a state of moving from creation consciousness from one extreme to another. For mortal humans like us, of course, Sadguru and Paramahansa are both having both ends of the seesaw when they come in human form. Would that be a good analogy to? I mean, I think that's maybe a good way of retaining what we have done and learned.
It's a
Yes,
good
I think
visualization. I'm not sure
yes,
of
yes.
the analogy. Yeah, go ahead.
No, in the seesaw, the Sadguru is in the he is neither
Both
in
sides.
the
In the
ground
middle.
or nor in the peak all the time. So he is in both the ends together at the same time. So that is, he is experiencing both false and positive together. Whereas Paramahamsa is goes this way, that way, keeps moving. But the Sadguru is in the extreme peak of the God realized position, and also the floor or the ground position, that is of the say
Creation
the
consciousness.
creation consciousness together. So that is his. So he doesn't move the seesaw, but he is in both ends all the time.
So
Correct, Mamaji.
Paramahamsa is seesaw,
Yes.
a flat seesaw where the weights are equal is the Sadguru.
No, not equal. Equal also means that he has partial knowledge of each plane, but he is in both the ends at the same time. One end at the top, the other end at the bottom. So we should imagine like that. So the
Correct.
top is the total God realization, and then the bottom is the total illusion or say aware of the duality. So he is in both the states together. So that is a unique thing. Not it cannot be done by everyone as such. So even the Paramahamsa keeps seesawing, but he cannot stay in both the ends together. That is the ultimate the difference between a Sadguru and a Paramahamsa.
Uh,
Jai
c-
Baba.
Correct, Mamaji. But this is just for an understanding for a
Yes, 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 yes.
person who's new, because we've been reading this Nothing and Everything, and they have explained about the both the duality and the reality, which we read um, in the earlier
God speaks and other
books
books.
and other books. So I just thought that maybe for a understanding that the Sadguru is definitely conscious of both the states at the same time, as
Yes,
you like said.
same time.
Not everyone can do that, because once you are, it's like for an ordinary man, even just ordinary mukti or just nirvana, and
Yes,
he reaches his goal, might be, I mean, it's a very important goal, and but he may not have both. Only very few people come down again, I mean, or have that ability of knowing both creation consciousness and God consciousness. As beautifully
yes,
explained here, I'm just saying for just as a remembrance, I mean, this is an example, that's all. This is
yes.
just my way of interpreting it. But yeah, Karthik, I know it's not mentioned here, but it's just for an analogy, helps us in retaining or helps us in remembering it for a long time, especially for somebody who's very new or getting introduced to the world of creation consciousness and God consciousness.
Yes,
Yeah, Baba.
yes, agreed, Ashok.
Yes.
Sure. So let me continue. When the infinite mind gives rise to creation, it is formless and bodiless Ishvara. When it experiences the creation, the infinite mind is with form, that is the mental, subtle, or gross conscious mind. When the infinite mind experiences its own self as in the state of Sadguru, it is formless and bodiless Paramatma and has no connection with bodies. The infinite intelligence, through the act of infinite formless thinking, creates the most fine, finite, formless creation as the infinite mental, subtle, and gross universes. Simultaneously, the infinite intelligence experiences creation through mental, subtle, and gross thinking in the form of mental, subtle, and gross bodies, and through infinite, formless, real thinking, infinite mind experiences its own self. The infinite intelligence as the infinite mind is in both the ordinary man and the Sadguru, but infinite intelligence creates through the infinite false mind of man and simultaneously does not create through the infinite real mind of the Sadguru. The ordinary man has a gross body. Behind it is the subtle body. Behind the subtle body is the most finite, fine mental body. And behind that is the individual infinite false mind. Behind the individual infinite false human mind is the universal infinite false mind, Ishvara, behind which is the infinite intelligence, infinite real mind, conscious God in man. The shadow
I think
of the
you need to read that paragraph once again. It's
simple but all encompassing.
yes,
The
yes,
ordinary man has a gross body. Behind it is the subtle body. Behind the subtle body is the most finite, fine mental body. And behind that is the individual, infinite, but false mind. Behind the individual, infinite, false human mind is the universal, infinite, false mind, Ishvara, behind which is the infinite intelligence in capital, infinite real mind, conscious God in man. So what starts
so
with
these
gross
last
body?
two stages, we
Mhm.
need to understand a little bit more, I think. Behind the individual infinite false human mind is the universal infinite false mind, Ishwar. So we seem to take that as God. The two more stages are behind which is the infinite intelligence, which is infinite real mind, conscious God in man. So the subtle difference between Ishwar and God has to be, it is explained elsewhere, earlier also we
Elsewhere,
have
yes,
read,
exactly. I was going to say, yeah.
but it is not
So Ish,
crystallizing in the mind.
so I think I hope I am right, but Ishvara is the form, is the God that we take to be in form,
Yes,
and is not the uh, the the real aspect of God.
yes.
So
It is the manifest God,
yeah,
not the
form,
formless God as such. So
correct.
that is at the home point, not beyond that. That is where we have to clearly understand that concept. So from the home point, all this starts. Before the home point, it is beyond, which is not understood. So this is the Ishvara is at that junction point.
Mm. Junction point, as in post. I mean post home point, in the sense.
After realization, you meant to say.
No, I'm saying
No,
after the
just
whim.
after the home
After the
point.
whim.
Yes,
So after the whim. Yeah, correct.
yes, yes, yes.
So, Jay Baba, basically we can relate it to the states of God, right? The
Yes,
the beyond is, of course, is the unknown arena, and then we have the beyond God, and then we have the God in manifestation, in the manifest form or in the human form.
yes, yes. That is
Yeah.
the way we have understood till now. This passage, the clear difference between the beyond and the beyond and beyond state, and then the manifest state. So these three states create some sort of a confusion sometimes. So we need to study that and understand that fine difference between that. So Ishvara means where is he? That is what is so Ishvara is manifest God, as I feel like now. So
Yeah,
that is man itself can be God at that stage, but he is the manifest God.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's
who has who has all the three functionalities, that is say creation, preservation, and dissolution.
Correct, Mamaji. I think we can also correlate it to the charts, especially chart 2 of God Speaks.
Ah, God
This
speaks. Okay.
that says creator, preserver, destroyer. And we can look at it up later on, but it's I
Yes,
think
sir.
not the chart 2 is a little easier to understand.
Yes, I'll just look it up.
Yeah. Jai Baba.
Yeah, Baba. So continue. The shadow of the infinite real mind is the infinite false mind. The shadows of the infinite false mind are the individual minds in illusion. And it is these shadows that create infinite illusions that are the one infinite imagination of infinite false mind. Infinite intelligence in capital is used by the infinite real mind of the Sadguru. The master does not use the infinite false mind. In the divine state of the Sadguru, infinite intelligence in capital, infinite real mind, and God are one and the same. And the Sadguru, as conscious God, has infinite real mind to fully use the infinite intelligence in capitals. There is no division in the infinite real mind, though the Sadguru experiences infinite false mind as shadow and all individual minds as the shadows that create creation infinitely. To the Sadguru, it is all one infinite mind in capitals.
Yes.
And by the way,
So,
that is the next chapter, Infinite Mind,
mind. Okay.
which I think we should take up tomorrow.
Tomorrow. But I will pose a question for tomorrow here.
Sure.
So, then what is the avatar state? With the last paragraph that we have read,
Mhm.
there is no division in the infinite real mind. Uh, though the Sadguru experiences infinite false mind as shadow, and all individual minds as the shadows that create creation infinitely, to the Sadguru it is all one infinite mind. So, if you try to explain the state of avatar in the same line of this logic, what will be the state of the mind, infinite intelligence of avatar? That's the question for tomorrow. If you can think over and then, or we may
Ponder
get that,
about it.
yes, or we may get the answer later in this book, probably.
Sure. All right. So have a great Saturday and see you all
What
tomorrow.
about
The
next
next
week?
book.
Yes,
The next book. Yeah. So let's decide tomorrow.
next book,
Let's
and then
discuss
how to get many more minds to
people
confuse
back.
us.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes. We'll talk about that as well. It's all
yes.
Sunil's fault. He's ignoring us. He and Nomita. Right. Anyway, on that
Yeah,
note,
back to Singapore. I just arrived back yesterday, so
Oh,
we should be
okay.
more regular from here. Sorry about.
okay, sure.
So both of you are back to Singapore, or
Yes, both of us, and I got my mom also to Singapore.
Mom also. Okay.
that's nice.
Yeah, so should be more regular for next few months, hopefully. So let's see. But then, yeah, food
Jai
for thought.
Baba.
I think yeah, many more people are not attending as well. So something we need to think about.
Sure.
Jai Baba.
Jai
Jai
Baba.
Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
See you all tomorrow. Bye.
Jai Baba, Jai Baba, yes.